I'm Patrick McGuire, the head of content here at Vice Canada, and welcome to our exclusive live event with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Earlier this month, Canada set itself on a path to become the second country in the world to legalize marijuana, but the nuts and bolts of that legislation are already provoking debate. I'm here hanging out with 4 replica marijuana plants, which represents what you'll be able to grow at home sometime next year. But until that green day arrives, we've prepared a short video that'll give you a feel for what this legislation is going to look like when it comes out next year. Take a look.
When cannabis becomes legal sometime around Canada Day 2018, here's what it'll mean for you. If the government legislation passes as is, you'll have to be at least 18 to buy weed in Canada, but the provinces could raise the minimum age. The provinces will also figure out where and how it's sold. 30 grams is the maximum amount of weed you'll be able to have on you legally. For those of you used to buying from a dealer, that's just over an ounce. And every household will be able to grow up to 4 plants. But the legislation also brings in some tough new penalties. Illegal sales and distribution could mean up to 14 years of jail time. Same goes for selling weed to a minor. By comparison, selling alcohol to someone who's underage in Ontario comes with a possible 1-year jail term. And if you're caught with an illegal amount of cannabis in your blood while driving, you could face anywhere from a $1,000 fine to 10 years in jail. To enforce that, the bill allows police to test drivers' saliva for THC. There are no details yet on how the federal government will set the price of weed or tax it. And the fate of the scores of pot dispensaries that have sprung up around the country is still unclear.
If you'd like to follow along with our conversation at home, you can use the Twitter hashtag ViceXTrudeauTalkWeed. And Vice has been at the forefront of reporting on cannabis legalization here in Canada, and a lot of that has been spearheaded by the reporting work of Manisha Krishnan. And I'm very happy to introduce her as our co-host for the evening, Manisha.
Thanks, Patrick. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. We are stoked to be facilitating a national conversation on the topic on everyone's mind right now, weed. The government's legalization bill has posed a lot of questions that we'll be putting to the Prime Minister tonight. As well, we have Mr. Bill Blair, who is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Justice Minister, and he's been the Liberals' point man on this bill. We'll also be taking questions from panelists who have been affected by these laws. Without further ado, let's bring out Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Thank you for being here, Prime Minister.
Real pleasure to be back.
I was hoping we could start with you telling us about the last time you smoked weed, and why was it the last time?
Actually, one of the things is my friends, my high school friends, everyone who's known me a long time, thinks it's just really, really funny that I'm the one in charge of legalizing marijuana, because they know that I am the boringest partier when it comes to drugs of any type. I was never really into it.
Okay.
A number of years ago, as anyone has, I was having an evening where there was a joint passed around, and I took a puff. But it's never been my thing. It's never been something that was big for me. But convincing me to move towards legalization was very much done on the policy basis, on the fact that the current approach is not working. It's hurting Canadians, it's funding criminals, and we have to make a change in our policy.
Right, and we've heard you talk a lot about taking resources away from organized crime and keeping marijuana out of the hands of children. Why do you think that it's a good idea, though, to give adults access to cannabis?
Well, I think, quite frankly, recognizing that it's a choice that a certain number of adults are going to make, and recognizing that we're in a system right now that because of adults making that choice, underage Canadians have easier access to it than just about any other country in the world. And criminal organizations are making billions of dollars a year on that trade, means that somewhere our system is failing to do what one hopes it is, which is keep Canadians safe and not benefit criminals.
Okay. Our next question is on tape, and it's from someone you may recognize.
Hello, Prime Minister Trudeau. I'm Seth Rogen. My question for you is this. Canada has announced it is moving towards the federal legalization of marijuana, while statements from the administration in America seem to suggest they are moving away from the federal legalization of marijuana. So I guess my question is, what do you know about marijuana that they don't know in America? Please tell them.
Well, I think one of the things that we are learning is directly because of the experience in a number of U.S. states that have legalized. We've been able to go down and learn from their successes, their failures. That has definitely helped us inform how we're going to move forward on a legalization framework. One of the big differences is we see states like Colorado move forward very much with a commercial mindset and already thinking about profits and revenue, whereas we're approaching it purely from a public health and safety standpoint. All the question of revenue and taxation is secondary to the fact that we want to make sure we're keeping our communities safe and not hurting Canadians.
Right. Sort of going back to the Canada versus America comparison for a second, we know that Canadians who are crossing the border who have admitted to have smoking pot in their past, in some cases are being banned from the U.S. for life. Is this an issue that you've broached with President Donald Trump?
Well, let's turn it around for a second. How would Canadians feel about any other country telling us who we can accept or can't into our country? That's something that we're very proud of, the fact that we set our rules about who we can accept, and we're not going to be told, oh, you can't accept these people, or you have to accept those people. We make determinations around that. I think we have to respect that the United States is allowed to make determinations about who they want into their country or not.
Right. So have you talked to President Trump about our legalization plan or any issues to do with that?
We've had information sessions where our officials have briefed their officials on the frame that we're looking forward, about the legalization framework we're looking at, but quite frankly, the discussions going on in the United States between the various states and the federal government are a lot more germane or interesting to them than what we're doing right now.
Okay, so you haven't talked to him personally about this?
I haven't spoken with him personally.
Okay. Let's sort of dive right into one of the more controversial aspects of legalization. More than 1 million Canadians have pot-related criminal records. Since you've been in power, more Canadians have been arrested, and we've seen dispensaries being cracked down on. Patrick is with a guest who's been directly impacted by this.
Thanks, Manisha. So I'm here with Malik, a young Torontonian who's recently entered the justice system as a result of cannabis possession, and he has a question for you, Mr. Prime Minister.
And hi, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hello, Malik.
About a year ago, I was charged with marijuana possession. And if convicted, I'm really afraid that I won't be able to travel to my other countries to see my family. In addition to that, how am I going to become the next prime minister if I can't get a decent job because of these charges? So given that all this is going to be legalized in about a year, what would you say to someone in my position?
Well, first I have to emphasize that if we're going to be legalizing it, which we are, we haven't done it yet. And until we change the laws currently exist. Now, at the same time, I have to recognize that, unfortunately, there's a lot of unfairness to Canadians in the current approach. And let me illustrate it with a story, one that I haven't told very often, but is really helped me thinking about my own process in this journey. My little brother, Mishi, died about 20 years ago in an avalanche accident. About 6 months before, he was driving back home from the West Coast across the country, and he got in a terrible, terrible car accident, and his truck tumbled, and a Sucrets box went flying across the highway. And when the police were helping him clean up and tow, they opened up the Sucrets box, and there's a couple of joints inside. So he was charged with possession. When he got back home to Montreal, my dad said, okay, don't worry about it. reached out to his friends in the legal community, got the best possible lawyer, and was very confident that we were going to be able to make those charges go away. We were able to do that because we had resources. My dad had a couple connections, and we were confident that my little brother wasn't going to be saddled with a criminal record for life. However, people from minority communities, marginalized communities, without economic resources are not going to have that kind of option to go through and clear their name in the justice system. And that's one of the fundamental unfairnesses of this current system, is that it affects different people differently. I mean, different communities in a different way. And Canada's supposed to be fair for everyone. And that's one of the reasons why we are going to be changing the laws. But at the same time, until we actually change the law, we can't take steps towards moving retroactively.
Right. So, sorry, after you change that law, what happens to the people that were previously affected by it when it wasn't legalized?
We will start a process where we try and look at how we're going to make things fairer for those folks and for you. But in the meantime, our focus is on making sure we're changing the legislation to fix what's broken about a system that's hurting Canadians like you. And then we'll take steps to look at what we can do for those people who have criminal records for something that would be no longer criminal.
We've had a bunch of questions from our Twitter audience relating to the issue of pot pardons for Canadians. So we created a poll on Twitter asking people where they land on the issue. 56% said they support a blanket pardon for pot convictions. I think another 35% said only for possession charges. So that's 91% of people who responded who are in support of some type of pardons. You know, you've already said that you realize it's unfair that some people are saddled with these convictions for a law for something that's going to be legal soon. So would you commit to something like a moratorium on pot possession charges until it's legal?
No.
Why not?
Because if we put a moratorium now, or if we decriminalize now, which is another thing people are saying, well, since you're going to legalize it, why not decriminalize it right now? Well, I'm sorry. If you're decriminalizing, the only people who are going to be growing and allowed to sell it will be criminals themselves. Because if you're decriminalizing possession, but you're not creating a legal framework for producing it, then it's still going to be organized crime, Hells Angels, street gangs controlling the sale of marijuana. And we don't want that. We want to get the profits out of there. We want to make sure that we're protecting underage Canadians from being able to purchase marijuana. So until we have a system in place that is a better system than our current system, the current system has to stand.
Right, but on the issue of amnesty and the issue of pardons, I mean, the Liberal Party in 2012 voted in favor of pot pardons. And I have to ask you, you know, would you feel differently if the last time you were smoking weed, you were caught and you were arrested for this?
You know, we've already said it's unfair that some people are much more likely to get arrested for pot possession, particularly from minority communities. That's wrong. That's one of the things that we need to fix and change. But you can't, I mean, what I never liked about decriminalization is it's sort of a half allowance of, okay, well, if you have it, we won't ask questions about where you got it from or who's making money off of it. You're just not going to get in trouble for it. We are moving forward in a rigorous, responsible way that's going to protect Canadians, protect our communities, and allow adults to make informed choices with a level of quality control that's not actually there now. And that's the right system, and I can understand certain people's impatience, but I also understand other people's worries that we need to get it right, and that's the balance that we're striving for.
In Oakland, California, what they're doing is people who have been jailed for pot crimes are giving the first chance to jump into the legal market as a form of reparations for the war on drugs. Is that a kind of policy that you would consider here with the licensed producers?
I think what we're focused on looking at for licensed producers is making sure that there are no criminal elements in those licensed producers. We know, we've seen reports that the criminal organized crime is very much in the business of growing and selling weed right now. We need to make sure that is not the case moving forward. So as we look for licensing licensing producers, we're going to do criminal background checks and ensure that that this is being done responsibly.
Wait, so people who have been convicted over sort of unfair prohibition laws won't be able to become licensed producers?
No, not necessarily. We're going to make evaluations, and these are part of the things that we're very much working out in terms of why we have a whole year to run towards the actual availability of this. But we're going to be responsible and reasonable about it. But if someone is convicted of drug trafficking already, I don't think we're going to reward them with an opportunity to sell it legally.
Okay. I want to turn to Mr. Blair for a question. Mr. Blair is the former Toronto police chief. This legislation suggests giving police broad new powers to test drivers for THC impairment and to demand breathalyzers regardless of whether or not there's suspicion of impairment. We've seen policies like this sort of disproportionately target people of color in the past. How will you ensure that they won't be targeted again?
Well, first of all, the legislation that has been proposed authorizes the police to use an approved device for roadside testing for cannabis at roadside. The measure that you make reference to about the ability of a police officer to demand a roadside screening test is for alcohol.
Right.
That currently is authorized under our law. You see them in ride spot checks at Christmas time and sometimes throughout the year where people are pulled over. When the police pull people over under those circumstances, they'll ask if they've had anything to drink, or they'll make certain observations, and if they have reasonable suspicion, they'll make the demand for a roadside test. The new legislation would then allow them to ask everyone to submit to that test. In jurisdictions where they've done that, they've seen as much as a 50% reduction in impaired death. And this has been implemented in 18 European countries, in Australia and New Zealand. Impaired driving is the #1 criminal cause of death in this country. And we have the potential with this legislation to save literally hundreds of lives. And not only just to prevent death, but the countless tragic accidents that take place that maim and wound so many people. And so we believe this measure is constitutional because of its strong potential to make our roadways safer and to protect the innocent.
Critics have said that the devices for testing saliva for THC are imprecise. And so I'm just wondering, how do you sort of respond to that claim?
Yeah, before a device will be approved, it requires the recommendation of the Drugs and Driving Committee of the Canadian Society for Forensic Scientists. They put these devices through rigorous testing. They have been used in a number of other jurisdictions successfully, and we rely on we like public policy based on evidence and based on the advice of experts. And that's what we'll be relying on to approve these devices. And certainly the evidence produced from it will be subject to rigorous examination in any subsequent court proceeding. I'm sure they'll be subject to various court challenges. But it is, I think, in everyone's interest that we do our very best to make sure that law enforcement has the legislation, the technology, the training, and the resources to keep our roadways safe.
Dispensary crackdowns are an issue that we've been covering closely, so we're going to look at a clip relating to that, and then Patrick will have a couple more questions for Mr. Blair.
Hey, I'm Rachel Brown from Vice News. We've been following the Toronto police crackdown on marijuana dispensaries across the city. We were there when the raids were happening, and we saw police take out people in handcuffs, and they've said that they've made several arrests. We spoke to someone who showed up to the dispensary to buy some marijuana for recreational use, but they got there too late as police had already started raiding the place.
I think it's a very poor use of police resources. I want to know how much money the city is wasting in police officer time and resources to come shut down this place that's going to be open in 48 hours again.
So, Mr. Blair, you've said that it was shocking that in 2014, 22,000 people were arrested on cannabis offenses, but obviously we're still seeing these dispensary raids happening in Toronto and elsewhere. So should we expect more of these as the year up to legalization continues?
Well, one of the things that we are trying to deal with in the introduction of this legislation is ensuring that whatever cannabis is consumed by adult Canadians is produced under strict regulatory conditions. So we know its potency, we know its purity, we know that it's safe, that it's regulated, and that it's been tested. And so the enforcement that you're seeing is the enforcement of the existing laws for cannabis that is grown outside of a regulated regime and sold outside of a regulated regime. You'll also notice in the enforcement that has taken place, the enforcement is overwhelmingly directed at those who are selling the drug, not those who are consuming it.
Right. So where does Vancouver land here? Because the city council, while waiting for the federal government to legalize, came up with their own set of regulations. Obviously, the supply is not regulated there. Where do they sit in the federal legislation?
Well, cities have a very significant responsibility to manage the local environment, and I know definitely in Vancouver they have initiated a system of regulation based on municipal bylaws, and they have the ability to do that. It's one of the reasons when we talk about this legislation that we're bringing forward, we acknowledge and recognize the important role that provinces and municipalities have in this, and sometimes local regulatory responses are more effective than a federal law, and that's why the role of the provinces, territories, and municipalities in our efforts to create a safer, healthier environment for our kids and our communities is so important.
So can I kind of dumb it down and just say that Vancouver can figure it out themselves, or is there more nuance to it?
No, I think what will transpire over the coming months as we work through the parliamentary process of this legislation and also work with provinces and territories is each of the provinces has the authority and, quite frankly, the appropriate level of governance to determine a well-regulated retail environment that is capable of supporting the public policy goals that we all share. And that's the protection of our kids and the safety of our communities. And so they'll bring in that legislation, and we very much respect British Columbia and every other province and territory's role and right to introduce legislation that works for them.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see how this all shakes out then. And, we talk a lot about the protection of kids, and the penalties in this legislation certainly reflect that. Providing cannabis to a minor can land someone, up to 14 years in prison, whereas if you give booze to a minor, let's say in Ontario, it's 1 year in jail. So how do we, reconcile that? Well,
actually, it's important to understand that when we talk about a maximum penalty of 14 years, that's for the worst crime and the worst offender. So somebody who's selling to 3-year-olds and has done it 27 times. That's the type of thing that the maximum penalties are for. This is a hybrid offense. And as well, we fully anticipate that you will see provincial regulations, as we do with alcohol, for example, a young person in possession of cannabis. It's far more appropriate to deal with that young person, not putting them in jeopardy of a criminal record, but we want to keep this drug out of the hands of kids. And so what you'll see is provincial legislation that will prohibit their possession of that drug, and that will enable any enforcement to ensure that it's kept out of the hands of kids, but those kids aren't in jeopardy of getting a criminal record.
Yeah, no, and I recognize there is a spectrum of offenses that leads to a maximum sentence, obviously, but when you go through the criminal code, leaving Canada to facilitate terrorist activity holds the same maximum prison sentence as growing too many cannabis plants. So who is this person that, is going to be growing so much cannabis that 14 years makes sense?
Again, worst offender and worst offense. But what we're trying to do is ensure that there is a well-regulated, safe supply for adults who choose to use this drug. And it's also very much part of our policy goals is to keep this drug in any form out of the hands of kids, because the science is quite strong that it represents a very significant health risk and a risk to the outcome for those kids. And so we believe very strongly, and I believe there's a national consensus that we should all do our best to protect the most vulnerable people in our society, and that's our kids.
Thank you. Very interesting. So, I think we've recognized that provincially, province to province, things are going to be fairly dynamic over the next year, let's say. We have Simon Coutu with us, who's our Vice Quebec correspondent, and he's going to show some tape.
Thanks, Patrick. Last year, I worked on a documentary about the transition from the gray and the black market, especially in Quebec, and we have a clip from it. Phil Beauséjour served 2 years in prison after getting caught with $500,000 worth of weed back in 2009. And unlike the Liberal government, he doesn't think legalization is going to impact the black market.
Phil, toi, tu as été dans la business du weed. Et aujourd'hui, là, pour ce que tu en sais, est-ce que c'est encore les gars de bicycle, les bikers qui contrôlent?
C'est la vie, ça. C'est des affaires à vie, ça. Ça, c'est ce qu'ils font.
Le cannabis.
Do you think that with the legalization, organized crime will still keep their hands on the cannabis industry?
I think they'll try. They're getting more sophisticated, so they understand that to compete going forward, they're going to have quality product and the type that to compete and so on. So they're making noise like they want to stay in the market and continue to compete.
So my question will be in French, but if you can please answer in French and then in English for our Quebec viewers. Avez-vous un plan B si les gens continuent à acheter leur cannabis auprès des dispensaires ou auprès du marché noir?
Je pense que ce que les gens reconnaissent, c'est qu'actuellement, il n'y a pas de marché noir pour de l'alcool.
Ouais, ben.
OK? Il n'y en a pas. There's no black market for beer, for alcohol. You're allowed to brew it in your... On peut en faire chez nous si on veut, mais la plupart des gens décident non, pour avoir de la qualité, pour avoir le vin que je veux, pour acheter de ma microbrasserie, je vais aller acheter de façon légale ce que je veux consommer, ce que je veux partager avec mes amis, à un niveau personnel. Les gens comprennent, oui, je vais choisir d'acheter légalement. Pour les cigarettes, oui, il y a un marché noir pour les cigarettes parce que les impôts sont très élevés. On est très conscient de ça. Un des buts, c'est pas de créer un incitatif pour le marché noir, c'est de reconnaître que si le marché légal peut être concurrentiel, la plupart des Canadiens vont choisir d'acheter de façon légale. C'est de la psychologie. Je pense que c'est assez raisonnable. Si quelqu'un a une option d'aller acheter quelque chose d'un Hells ou bien de l'acheter d'une place réglementée et la qualité est aussi bonne ou meilleure, les gens, un bon citoyen, va d'habitude choisir d'acheter de façon légale. Je pense que c'est tout à fait raisonnable et c'est vers là qu'on regarde. So the fact is, if you give a consumer the choice between buying something from a shady character in a stairwell of uncertain provenance that's roughly the same price as buying it from a regulated place that's maybe the brand you like is certified organic or a particular strain, I mean, where you can be confident of the quality, the provenance, and that you're not breaking the law, consumers will choose a reasonable option. That's why there's no black market for alcohol. There's a black market for cigarettes when it comes to taxation. But if prices were even, people would choose to buy legal.
Ça va être aux provinces de décider comment elles vont vendre le cannabis. Si certaines provinces ne sont pas en mesure de le rendre disponible, vous ne croyez pas que ça va être le crime organisé ou le marché noir qui va combler ce vide-là?
C'est pour ça notre préférence, c'est que toutes les provinces créent leur propre système approprié pour eux sur les bases de ce qu'on veut établir au niveau fédéral. On reconnaît que différentes provinces vont avoir différentes approches. C'est juste la vente de l'alcool, c'est différent en Ontario qu'au Québec, que les gens font des choix différents. Et c'est pour ça, d'ailleurs, qu'on travaille avec les provinces depuis longtemps. Ça fait 1 an qu'on annonçait que la législation allait arriver maintenant. Ils ont plus qu'1 an maintenant jusqu'à l'été prochain. On est en train de travailler avec eux pour établir le système qu'ils veulent. Mais si ils décident qu'ils ne veulent pas amener de projet de loi à la province, on va rendre disponible par un système fédéral, probablement sur Internet, le cannabis.
Donc, vous allez imposer votre système?
Notre système va être accessible pour tous ceux qui n'ont pas un système dans leur province. Donc, il va y avoir une façon pour tout le monde à travers le pays qui a l'âge de la majorité d'acheter du cannabis.
In English, please?
Of course. We know that the provinces are going to be, and territories are going to be an important partner in this. Just as different provinces choose different regimes around selling alcohol, different places might choose different approaches. And we're going to work with them. That's why I've been talking about it since the election. We've given people a year's heads up with this task force that went around the country that we were going to bring forward the legislation at this time. The provinces have well over a year now, close to 15 months, to put in place their system that suits them. If a province chooses not to, there will still be a way through the federally regulated system for people in every corner of this country to purchase marijuana.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly ask, where is this shady person in a stairwell reference coming from? Is it like a bad 80s movie cliche, or who is this person?
It's actually one of the things that I've heard a lot from kids in schools. When you okay, you know what kid has it in the locker? You're right, but it's when teenagers know how to get their hands on joints.
In the stairwell.
We know that. As a teacher, I know that teachers don't keep an eye on stairwells as often as well as they should. But it's there's a lot of places where people know. Look, if young people are the highest per capita users in the world in Canada of illegal marijuana, then they're getting it from somewhere.
I know. I just mean I think it's like their friends selling it rather than like
Yeah, but where do their friends get it from?
I don't know.
Well, no, but see, that's the issue, right? That's the issue.
Honestly, it's probably
the issue
like
with dispensaries. It's the issue with getting it from a friend who got it from a friend. Organized crime, as we've seen it, is all over this.
Right. You're saying somewhere along the chain there's someone in a stairwell who's shady.
The only interaction most law-abiding Canadians have with criminals, or many law-abiding Canadians have with criminals, is in purchasing marijuana.
We're going to move on and talk about money a little bit. Weed is poised to be a multi-billion-dollar industry in Canada, but there has been some tension between the dispensaries and the federally licensed producers. So we're going to take a question from Jody Emery. She's a former dispensary owner and activist currently facing trafficking charges.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hi,
Good
Jody.
to see you again.
Good.
My question is, how does your government intend to incorporate the longtime activists and medical marijuana dispensaries who helped make legalization possible when your system is proposing to restrict the production to only big licensed producer companies?
Okay, actually two things in that, Jody, and that's a great question. The first one, you mentioned medical marijuana. Right now, the medical marijuana system, which we've heard, all sorts of people how, certain aspects of marijuana is really good for certain conditions. The medical marijuana system that exists in Canada will stay as is for the coming years. Right now, however, the medical marijuana system is the only legal system also for recreational use, and a lot of people are getting recreational marijuana through the medical marijuana system. So once we've created opportunities for adults to purchase marijuana for recreational use legally, that's going to take a lot of pressure off of the medical marijuana system, and we'll be able to make better determinations about how to support medical marijuana users and producers and the research that needs to continue going on in that. So separating out those two things is going to radically transform the environment in which medical marijuana currently works. Secondly, in regards to licensed producers, and it's really good that you're highlighting this, what we're looking at is licensing the production of marijuana. Provinces will determine whether it's sold through dispensaries or whether it's sold through like liquor boards or liquor control boards like they have in Ontario. The various approaches will be done by the provinces. But we're going to regulate producers. In that, I'm sure there will be, and there already have indications that there are going to be big corporate-style players. But at the same time, we are very, very much focused on making sure that there's a market that's going to meet the needs and interests of Canadians. And I know Canadians like, regardless of the big corporate beers, people like their microbrews. We know that people are going to want to choose organic or low pesticides or a particular this or a particular that. And there is going to be an opportunity for small producers to get regulated and to sell product.
Well, what would you say? Will your government apologize to the many Canadians who have been criminalized and victimized under these laws that you admit are unfair and disproportionate and criminalize peaceful, nonviolent people? Will you apologize for that?
Well, Jody, I think people sort of understand that you and I are coming at this from a different perspective. You're coming at it from a lifestyle and a business choice. I'm coming at it from a public policy and safety and health choice, health approach. We have a system that isn't working. It's hurting Canadians. It's hurting minorities, it's hurting young people. The current system doesn't work to protect our communities, to protect our kids. We need to change that. We will change that. We will change the law. We're taking the time necessary to get it right, because we've seen in places where it hasn't exactly gone right, that we can learn from that. And then we will move forward in a thoughtful way on fixing past wrongs that happened because of this erroneous law that I didn't put in place and that I'm working hard to fix.
The Supreme Court has ruled that medical marijuana patients should have access to edibles, but currently the only legal way to get them is if you get extracts from a licensed producer and then you make them yourself. So Canadians are turning to the black market to get their sweet and savory medicated treats. Vice has done a documentary called Candyland about the black market of edibles, and we're going to watch a clip from that now.
It could finally be legal, and it just gets taken away from the little guy, right? It just gets taken away from that guy who's been struggling his whole life doing his thing, helping people.
Is that like something that you ever want to think?
Absolutely. I would love to pay taxes.
Yeah.
I would be so shocked if Health Canada reached out to the companies that already exist and were like, listen, do you want to do this the right way? Here's how.
I would love a licensed producer to come find me and to work for one of those guys to be able to get it out to the people that need it the most, because they have the most patients. I think that's where the future would be.
So this is how some people are getting their edibles. Many Canadians prefer to ingest their cannabis, and there's already a thriving black market for it. How are you going to make a dent in the black market if this legislation does not address edibles?
I think one of the things that in the title, Candyland, you're highlighting it. There's a lot of concerns about access by kids to edibles, and there's a lot of concerns about learning from Colorado and elsewhere the challenges of edibles. So we haven't said, I mean, she says the future is there. I agree, but we don't yet have full confidence that we know what a regulated framework around edibles will look like. What it'll look like 5 years from now, what it'll look like 10 years from now, we have to get it right. There's a huge amount of pressure on this. We're taking a big step towards actual legalization of cannabis in its oils forms and dried forms. That next step, we're going to be working on it within the new framework, and it's in the future. But again, we're focusing on getting it right.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. So I'm over here with a couple of people that have concerns both about medical marijuana and harm reduction. We're going to start with Ian Campeau, who's maybe best known as a member of the group, a tribe called Red, but he has a personal connection to medical marijuana as well.
Hi. My wife had breast cancer, and she had a mastectomy, and then she had chemo, then a mastectomy, and then radiation. And in that community, like she's using cannabis for her pain, and actually off of all opiates, and only using cannabis for her nerve pain, which is brilliant. But she so in that community, going through chemo, a lot of people use this cannabis for a lot of different medical reasons to help them with all kinds of things. Now with LPs, these licensed producers getting caught with different pesticides, different mildews and things like that are extremely harmful for these people that have that are at their most vulnerable immunity. I'm just wondering how can the government make sure that you're going to take care of the health of people?
Well, listen, I absolutely appreciate what you're saying, and I've heard stories like that all across the country, as have Bill. And that's why the current medical marijuana regime will stay in place exactly as is. So how your wife is accessing her medical marijuana right now will continue beyond the legalization framework that we're bringing in for recreational. We are not going to be removing or reducing or limiting in any way the medical marijuana field. We just know that right now, medical marijuana, on top of being used by people for medical prescription purposes, is also an access for someone who would just as happily buy it legally for recreational uses or minor uses if it were legal. So we know that we're actually going to be removing a lot of pressure from the medical marijuana system, which will allow it to better serve.
I'm more looking at like the responsibility of the LPs and the guidelines for them to make sure that it's safe for people. Is there any way to ensure that these people who are going to be using cannabis that could potentially at their most vulnerable, right? Like they're at their most vulnerable in their immunity, and I just want to make sure that that's going to be safe.
Well, again, the medical use of marijuana is going to continue in the way it is now. Around licensed producers, absolutely. Health Canada is going to regulate all licensed producers the way we regulate any broad range of consumer products and health products. We're going to make sure that they're being properly made, and if there are concerns around mold or mildew or anything like that, there will be immediate consequences and people will lose their licenses.
As an Indigenous person, going on, knowing about like grassy narrows, knowing about like youth suicide, knowing about like water problems, I want to know how I can like trust these promises of health for these people.
Well, I understand the concerns, and that's one of the reasons why we're going to make sure that we're listening to Indigenous peoples and giving opportunities for Indigenous communities to access the licensed producer regime. We know that we have to make sure there are good licensed producers right across the country. Different communities have access to it, and I know there's been definite work around ensuring that Indigenous producers are going to have an opportunity to be part of the legalized regime.
I've spoken with doctors who believe that cannabis should be used to treat a number of health ailments, including potentially replacing opioids for pain management, but the research is not being adequately funded. Will your government commit to addressing that gap?
That's one of the things that we're definitely looking at. Within a legalized framework, we're going to be able to do the kind of research that hasn't been properly undertook to determine exactly what certainly anecdotally, an awful lot of people in the medical marijuana community believe very strongly. I think it's a great opportunity to actually advance medical science by understanding, the medical community has very powerful drugs for acute short-term pain. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of great drugs for chronic, low-grade, but very annoying long-term pain. Marijuana is often prescribed exactly for that. Having better knowledge, better understanding about that is entirely what we're going to be able to do. And on the flip side of it, we talked briefly about revenue, and revenue is not part of it, but to use a similar example, there is no wait time for anyone searching for a gambling addiction treatment. Anyone who has a gambling addiction can get treatment very, reasonably straightforward way, because part of the profits from legal gambling is put into addiction treatment programs. Similarly, some of the revenue from legalizing and taxing marijuana will certainly go into research, go into treatment, go into support for people struggling with challenges.
Well, this leads us to Zoe Dodd, who's a Toronto-based harm reduction worker that has a question for you.
Hi, thank you. I've been working in the front lines in Toronto, in the downtown east, in harm reduction, supporting people who use drugs for the past 13 years. We are in a national crisis. I have lost 5 friends this past year alone and 30 people I've been working with. We cannot continue as business as usual. 1,400 people have died in the last 18 months in BC. That's 4 people every day, and 2 people are dying here every day here in Ontario. The laws in this country mean that people are buying drugs that are unsafe, and the drugs that people are accessing are tainted, and fentanyl has been found to be laced in a lot of the drugs, and that is what's contributing to the crisis. Your government's current plan to address the overdose epidemic is not working. We are here to talk about the legalization of cannabis, and yet we are in this national devastating crisis. It is a significant loss. So what my question to you, Mr. Prime Minister, is, will you legalize all drugs so that we can end the overdose epidemic and save lives?
First of all, Zoe, thank you for the amazing work you and frontline workers across the country are doing to deal with this opioid epidemic. I've sat down a couple times now with frontline workers and experts in the Lower East Side in Vancouver to talk directly about this, and a number of the recommendations they've asked for, we've brought in. We've made a number of changes. It's now easier to bring in prescription heroin into this country so that it can access the people who need it will have access through responsible or structured centers like this. There are definitely things that we can do, and there's more that we can do. However, we made a commitment and we got a mandate to legalize marijuana, to protect our kids, to protect Canadians, to make sure that we're removing the criminal elements from that. We're moving ahead on that. We're moving in different ways on other drugs, whether it's more safe consumption sites, whether it's better access to prescription opioids and even heroin. There are things that we can do that are helping, but I agree, it's a crisis and we need to do more.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, your government has, the bulk drugs for prescription heroin. It's a really commendable thing to do, except for the fact that we don't have the resources to open those clinics, and those resources haven't poured out. So Crosstown Clinic in Vancouver can only see 60 people. So what about the rest of the country and the access for other people? So yes, you've made some decisions that are important, like you don't need a prescription for naloxone, but we don't have the resources to actually do the overdose prevention we need to do. This is an emergency. This is a national crisis. 1,400 people dying in 16 months is a disaster. It's a national disaster. You are not doing enough. The bodies keep mounting. And yes, cannabis, we are here about legalization of cannabis, but we need millions of dollars. I am a frontline worker who's not been on her job the last 6 weeks because people keep dying around me, and I am completely traumatized because we don't have the resources to do our work. And it is up to you, Mr. Prime Minister, to find those millions of dollars so we can open those clinics and get access so that more people don't die. And I would say to you that you should look to the model in Portugal. They stopped their overdose epidemic when they decriminalized drugs, and they've had that model for 10 years, and it's been exceptional, and we have models to look at. And I would say, be brave. You talk about the safety of children, you talk about the safety of youth. It is young people who are dying, and it is young people who elected you. Save their lives too. It's between the ages of 30 and 39 who are dying in BC. Those are young people. Those are people who have value. And it is not stopping, and it is not slowing down. Do something. Seriously, do something.
We've worked with the provinces who are delivering on healthcare. We are sending tens of millions of dollars. We are sending tens of millions of dollars, but I know there is more to do, and we will be doing more to support, including supporting the frontline workers who I've spoken to, whether it's paramedics or frontline support workers in harm reduction sites who are going through PTSD because there are so many people dying on them. We absolutely need to do more to support you, more to support and respond to this crisis, and we are doing it.
So I guess the question is, outside of cannabis, when it comes to other drugs, will your government continue to wage a war on drugs?
We're continuing to make sure that the safety of Canadians is paramount and that we make decisions based on evidence. That's why, unlike the previous government, we're moving forward on safe consumption sites. Why we have reversed previous decisions to ban prescription heroin from coming into the country. We are listing. We took naloxone off the prescription list. We've done significant things to move in the right direction on that, and we're going to continue to work with frontline activists and advocates who are seeing this terrible crisis. There's things we can do internationally as well. We're working with China to help stem the tide of fentanyl, the carfentanil. We're coordinating with the United States on this. We're doing a number of things, but I agree, it's not yet enough, and that's why we're working so closely with the provinces and affected municipalities, of which there are more and more, to make sure that we get this public health emergency under control.
Right, but Zoe is a frontline worker, and we've heard from frontline workers who are dealing with the opioid crisis who say that decriminalizing other drugs or legalizing them will help address this crisis. So really, where do you stand on that issue?
I'm not there yet.
Okay. Mr. Blair, same question to you. Where do you stand on the issue of decriminalizing or legalizing other drugs in order to attempt to solve the opioid crisis?
Listen, we all respect Zoe's perspective and people that are working on the front line. I've also worked on the front line in a different capacity. But the evidence is not strong that simply making these drugs legally available is the answer. And there's no one simple solution. And that's why our government is looking at the best advice of experts and the evidence. They're looking at, certainly supply interdiction is important, and we're doing work with our international partners. But demand reduction, treatment, research, prevention, rehabilitation. You know, I've talked to some of my former colleagues in cities across the country, and they tell me that there's virtually no rehabilitation beds, no detox beds available to them. And it's one of the reasons, and I'm so proud that our government's made a commitment. We recognize that there's revenue opportunities in our plan to legalize and regulate cannabis, and we've made commitments to make investments in that research, which is so important, in treatment, in rehabilitation and treatment, and services on the front line that will save lives.
Going back to cannabis for a minute, you have expressed concerns about legalizing this bill on Canada Day. When can we expect this to become law?
Yeah, just our intent is to do this by July 1st, not necessarily on July 1st. You know, there were a number of people quite naturally concerned about, you know, the impact of doing this on the day in which we celebrate the birth of the country, but it didn't change our intent. The government's intent was always to get this work done by July 1st. That's our target. We've got a great deal of work to do, but I think it's a reasonable target, and we can't afford to drag our feet. There is too much risk to our kids, too much risk to our communities. We've made a commitment, and I'll tell you there's a consensus across the country that we must do better. We can do better, and that's our commitment, and we believe that if we all work hard together, we can get it done by July 1st.
Mr. Prime Minister, how will you be celebrating legalization?
I'm
You gonna go
more
for
of
it?
a beer and a bourbon kind of guy. I'm a little more on the Jack Daniels and microbrews than I am on marijuana, legal or otherwise.
All right, we'll see if you can change your mind on that. Mr. Blair, same question to you. Will you be celebrating legalization?
The Prime Minister said earlier he's the most boring guy in the country on this. I've got him beat. and I know that, and frankly, I have no intention of using this drug personally, but I will celebrate if we're successful in doing a better job protecting our kids and our community. That'll be worth celebrating.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, so thank you to everybody for coming out. Special thanks to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Mr. Bill Blair, and all of our panelists who came out, and CPAC. If you want to follow along the conversation online, our hashtag on Twitter is ViceXTrudeau Talk Weed. Good night, everyone.